Obviously, Huckabee Sanders was asked about Roseanne Barr and the White House's reaction. Here's what happened.
Where was Bob Iger's apology to the White House staff for Jamel Hill calling the president and anyone associated with him a white supremacist? To Christians around the world for Joy Behar calling Christianity a mental illness? Where was the apology for Kathy Griffin going on a profane rant against the president on The View after a photo showed her holding President Trump's decapitated head? And where was the apology from Bob Iger for ESPN hiring Keith Olbermann after his numerous expletive-laced tweets attacking the president as a Nazi and even expanding Olbermann's role after that attack against the president's family? This is a double standard that the president is speaking about. No one is defending her comments. They're inappropriate, but that's what the point that he was making.
And, of course, she left off Bill Maher, calling Sarah Palin the C word, calling her a dumb T word, calling Michelle Bachmann and Sarah Palin, quote, two bimbos, referring to Trig, Sarah Palin's son with Down syndrome, as quote-unquote retarded? Are you kidding me? Where was the apology? And Bill Maher said, well, in his defense, I said it in my stand-up, the C word part. I think the dumb T word was said on HBO, but the C word was said in his stand-up. I'll give him that. So was Michael Richards in that club here in Hollywood, when he went off on some black hecklers and said N-word repeatedly. That was stand-up. That was a private club. That did not inoculate Richards from the fallout, nor should it have. Valerie Jarrett.
Well, this is what I think, Chris. I think tone does start at the top, and we like to look up to our president and feel...
So there it is. Trump all but wrote the thing for her. Trump broke into her house, took her Twitter account, and basically wrote the damn thing. Because Trump is the one that caused her to do it. All this is about Trump. This is all about Trump. Trump setting the atmosphere for racism to feel comfortable and emerge.
So he reflects the values of our country. But I also think every individual citizen has a responsibility, too. And it's up to all of us to push back. Our government is only going to be as good as we make it be. And as Reverend always taught me, you have to be, people on the inside have to push hard and people on the outside have to listen. And I think that I'm heartened by so much of what I've seen over the last several months. Those young people from Parkland who were able to force Florida to change a law that they had no intention of changing before the tragedy shows what happens when ordinary Americans lift up and have their voices heard.
We shall overcome.
Or every black parent I know who has a boy who has to sit down and have a conversation, the talk, as we call it. And those, as you say, those ordinary examples of racism that happen every single day. And I think that's why I'm so glad to be here this evening talking with all of you.
You see, when people talk about President Trump lying, distorting the truth, what you just now heard from Valerie Jarrett is the big lie pushed by the left. The big lie, of course, is that racism remains this formidable problem in America, when in fact it doesn't. Ordinary examples of racism happen every single day, she said. Really? You remember that poll that was taken by Time and CNN in 1997, 20 years ago? Black teens and white teens were asked about racism, whether racism is a major problem in America. More white kids said it was a major problem in America than black teens did. Both of them said it was a problem. Don't get me wrong. But then black teens were asked, is racism a big problem, a small problem, or no problem in your own daily lives? 89% said small or no problem in my own daily life. What does racism have to do with your doing 2 good, hard hours of homework every night? What does racism have to do with your not having a kid before you're 20 and getting married first? Which is the formula that a former top aide to Bill Clinton said is the formula to avoid poverty. Finish high school, don't have a kid before you're 20, get married before you have the kid, and you will not be poor. Why aren't we talking about that? My goodness. Charles Blow, the New York Times reporter, columnist. went on the air and talked about the anguish of slavery and about all the people that died. You didn't die. You weren't a slave. You weren't there.
Bingo.
888-971-SAGE, 888-971-7243. Harvey Weinstein is to be indicted by a New York grand jury. Trump called Nancy Pelosi an MS-13 lover. Ken Starr said the DOJ IG should handle the FBI spy issue. And what does Ken Starr think of the job Rudy Giuliani is doing? Trey Gowdy says, I've always said Trump ought to sit down with Bob Mueller. New York Times columnist Tom Friedman calls Trump the greatest threat to our democracy. As to the midterms, Tom Friedman says, the worst Democrat is better than the best Republican. But first, the big news, of course, is the cancellation of the Roseanne Barr show. ABC canceled it after she sent out an offensive tweet suggesting that Valerie Jarrett, the former aide to Obama, would be the offspring of the Muslim Brotherhood and the Planet of the Apes. She deleted the tweet, but the damage, of course, had been done. As I mentioned, ABC dropped her. Her agency, ICM, dropped her. Even though the same agency represents a group called Suicide Boys. You want to see some of their lyrics? N-word this, N-word this, N-word that, but I digress. Trump did not put out a tweet saying what she said was offensive, what she said was horrible. ABC had no choice but to take action. It shows you that we need to be sensitive. He didn't say any of that. Instead, he sent out this tweet. Quote, Bob Iger of ABC called Valerie Jarrett to let her know that ABC does not tolerate comments like those made by Roseanne Barr. Gee, he never called President Donald J. Trump to apologize for the horrible statements made and said about me on ABC. Maybe I just didn't get the call. Close quote. Now, he's being hammered for not specifically referring to the statement that Roseanne Barr made and for not condemning the statement. But Donald Trump is absolutely right to point up the double standards, the selective outrage, the hypocrisy. I talked about some of it yesterday. Jimmy Kimmel works for ABC. He was discussing the time that President Trump brushed off the dandruff off of the shoulder of Emmanuel Macron from France. You might recall that. And Kimmel said, that's what orangutans do. They groom. Was there some sort of advertiser fallout? What about the time when Bill Maher said of Citizen Trump several years ago that he would give Trump $5 million to prove he's not the offspring of an orangutan? You remember that? I bet you don't. Yesterday I talked about the stuff that Bill Maher said about Sarah Palin, calling her the C word. Yeah, it was in the stand-up. But Michael Richards was in the stand-up, wasn't he? The former cast member of Seinfeld, thank you. Former cast member of Seinfeld who during a outburst, because he was upset at hecklers, black hecklers, remember he went off on a rant and used the N-word over and over and over again? That was during a stand-up. That was during a private club. Did that absolve him of responsibility for what he said? The man is practically in the witness protection program now. I haven't heard from him since then. Have you? You remember Erin Burnett when she was a reporter on MSNBC Hee Haw? And she was covering an event, foreign affairs with President George W. Bush. And Bush was flanked by foreign leaders. And she referred to President George W. Bush as, quote, that monkey in the middle, close quote. Remember that? And now she, of course, has a show on CNN. Don Lemon, not a comedian, supposedly a journalist, refers to President Trump as, quote, a racist. That's it. State of fact. Not an opinion. Water's wet. Sky's blue. Trump's a racist, says this journalist on television, on CNN. That's not a problem. And don't get me started on Keith Olbermann, who works for ESPN, who now reportedly is getting, quote, an expanded role, close quote, with ESPN. That's how much they like him. Here's just one that Olbermann tweeted last year about President Trump. F you, real Donald Trump. Nazi, Nazi, F Nazi, Nazi, racist, Nazi, Nazi, bigot. Go F yourself. Effing Nazi effers. And then there's a tweet that Olbermann directed at Ivanka Trump, President Trump's daughter. Quote, then tell your racist, white supremacist, neo-Nazi father to get the F out of our society. Close quote. Now, one might think that Disney, that put out the statement, we find Roseanne Barr's statement, quote, abhorrent, repugnant, inconsistent with our values, close quote. You'd think that some of the things that Keith Olbermann said about President Trump would be abhorrent, repugnant, and inconsistent with the values of Disney. Same company. Unbelievable. And then the guy that led the charge, that put out a tweet right away and demanded that ABC do something, was none other than your friend and mine, Reverend Al Sharpton. Tom Wolfe just died. He's a writer. He wrote that great novel, Bonfire of Vanities. And in Bonfire of the Vanities, one of the central characters is a guy named Reverend Bacon. And Reverend Bacon is clearly patterned after Al Sharpton. Race hustling, charlatan, using race to advance his agenda, exaggerating racism. Sharpton demanded that ABC do something. That Sharpton has a TV show having falsely accused Stephen Pagonis of raping Tawana Brawley. Pagonis' daughter being taunted at school. He got death threats, of course. Sharpton once called David Dinkins, New York's first and only black mayor, an N-word whore. Called Jews diamond merchants. Called whites moving into Harlem interlopers. Didn't bother waiting for the Ferguson grand jury to do their work. He took to the streets of Ferguson bellowing, no justice, no peace. Even though the officer was completely exonerated. Even though, turns out Michael Brown's friend lied. He didn't put his hands up. He wasn't running away. His DNA was found on Officer Darren Wilson's gun, for crying out loud. Did Sharpton's attempt to essentially start a riot cause MSNBC Hee Haw and his parent company to reconsider their relationship with him? Are you kidding? Are you kidding? Meanwhile, on The View, here's what Sonny Hostin said about Trump's victory. Quote, 20% of people voted because of racism. And I think after 8 years of a black president, there was no way that Clinton was going to win. End of quote. Never mind of 700 counties, districts, that voted twice for Obama, 200 of them switched to Trump. Now, when did the racism kick in for those 200 districts that voted twice for Obama and then switched to Donald Trump? When did the racism kick in, Ms. Hostin? And frankly, the reaction to what Roseanne Barr said demonstrates what the former editor of the National Review, John O'Sullivan, once said. White racism, Sullivan said, does exist, but its social power is weak, and the social power arrayed against it is overwhelming. End of quote. We come back, we're going to get some reaction. Al Sharpton, of course, weighed in. Valerie Jarrett fired back. All that's coming up. I'm Larry Elder.
Larry Elder.
Joy Reid blamed Trump for the Roseanne Barr tweet.
Well, I mean, in the apology, I think the "and her looks" part is the part that stands out to me, because essentially Roseanne is admitting that the Planet of the Apes part of that joke, it was not about her politics, it was about her appearance and the sort of bestializing of black people. Look, we saw people making gorilla and ape jokes about Michelle Obama, the First Lady of the United States. It was common. It was Googleable all over social media. It's a place that people go when talking about black people, and it goes back centuries. And so I think, that was a very telling part of the apology. You've now seen.
Don't forget, this is the woman who sent out a bunch of homophobic tweets, and then later on said that she apologized for them, and then later on said that she didn't really send them, that she'd been hacked. And MSNBC did an investigation, and they said that there's no evidence that she'd been hacked.
Wanda Sykes walked away from the show, black comedian who was one of the head writers on the show. It's fraught because I think for a lot of Roseanne's fans who now are really sort of in a big Venn diagram with Trump fans, they see this as no big deal, that this is something that you should be able to say. Why can't you say it? Well, it's just jokes. Why are people taking it to heart? That's part of the problem, is that you have a certain set of people who feel that you should be able to speak this way. And unfortunately, we have a president at the moment who's kind of giving a broad sense of permission to not be politically correct, to speak.
I can't take it anymore.
Larry will be right